Poor girl paid a stranger's bus fare, unaware he was a millionaire who'd change her life forever. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain came down in thin silver sheets that blurred the streetlights into halos of gold. The city bus stop on 5th and Maple smelled of wet concrete and engine fumes. Emily Parker stood beneath the cracked shelter, her thrift store coat soaked through, her shoes squishing every time she shifted her weight. Her shift at the diner had ended 2 hours late, and her paycheck, barely enough to cover rent, was folded carefully in her purse, untouched. She was cold, hungry, and bone-tired, but there was still a quiet kindness in her eyes. The digital clock above the pharmacy blinked 11:42 when a man approached the line. He looked completely out of place among the night workers and students. His jacket was threadbare, his hair damp against his forehead, and his eyes, clear gray, held that restless mix of pride and defeat. He patted his pockets once, twice, and frowned. "Excuse me," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from the cold. "I am sorry, but I lost my wallet. I just need $2 to catch the bus home." The woman behind Emily looked away. A teenager beside her pulled out his phone, pretending not to hear. Emily hesitated. Her last $10 bill was tucked inside her coat pocket, the one she had promised herself to save for breakfast tomorrow. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, soft and certain. "If you have enough to help, you have enough." She took a slow breath, reached into her pocket, and handed him the bill. "Here," she said, trying to smile. "Go ahead before the bus leaves." The man blinked, startled. "That is too much. I only need—" "Just take it," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I will be fine." He looked at her for a long second, as if memorizing her face, then nodded. "Thank you. I promise I will pay you back." The bus arrived with a low hiss, brakes squealing on wet asphalt. The stranger climbed aboard, glancing back one last time before disappearing down the aisle. Emily stood in the drizzle, her hair clinging to her cheeks, the empty space in her pocket suddenly heavy. When her own bus arrived, she stepped on, staring out the fogged window. Streetlights smeared into streaks of yellow, the city sliding by like a half-forgotten dream. She whispered to herself, half laughing, half tired, "There goes my breakfast." But deep down, under the noise of the rain and the hum of the bus, something felt different. She could not explain it, but that small act, the $10, the look in his eyes, had shifted something quiet inside her world. She did not know it yet, but that night's kindness would echo back to her in ways she could never imagine. The following morning came gray and heavy, the kind of sky that pressed low over the city and promised more rain. The pavement was still slick, shining with puddles that reflected the pale dawn light. Emily Parker sat on the narrow edge of her bed in the tiny apartment she shared with 2 other tenants. The air smelled faintly of detergent and last night's coffee. Her hands rested on her apron, folded neatly in her lap, and her mind replayed the moment at the bus stop over and over again, the way the stranger had looked at her, the surprise in his eyes, and that single word, "Thank you." She shook her head as if to push the thought away. She had work in less than 1 hour. The diner never waited, and late arrivals were noticed. Emily changed quickly, slipped on her worn sneakers, and grabbed the last piece of bread from the counter. The elevator in her building had been broken for months, so she took the stairs down 6 flights, breathing hard when she reached the bottom. Outside, the air smelled of wet asphalt and exhaust. Her umbrella was missing a rib, but she used it anyway. She walked the 6 blocks to work, because she could not afford another bus fare. Inside the diner, the smell of frying oil and coffee hit her like a wave. The morning rush had already begun. Her manager, a round man named Terry, glanced at her and frowned. "You are late again, Emily," he said, not unkindly, but with the weight of routine disappointment. "I am sorry," she replied. The buses were off schedule. He sighed and pointed toward the counter. "Table 3 has been waiting for coffee for 10 minutes. Let us move." Emily worked fast. She carried trays, refilled mugs, smiled through fatigue. Her hands moved automatically, her mind elsewhere. Around noon, she finally stopped long enough to eat a few fries at the back counter. She reached into her pocket for the small tip she had earned, only to find the empty space where her $10 bill used to be. A brief ache passed through her chest. She reminded herself that she had done the right thing. Still, the cost of goodness felt heavier when rent was due in 3 days. That afternoon, a storm rolled in without warning. The lights flickered once, twice. When thunder rumbled overhead, the manager shouted from behind the counter, "Emily, power is out in half the kitchen. Grab the mop and check the back hallway." She hurried toward the dark corridor where a puddle had formed from a leaking pipe. Her sneakers slipped slightly on the wet floor. She caught herself just in time, heart racing. It was a small moment, but it reminded her how close her balance, financial and emotional, always was to breaking. By evening, the storm had flooded parts of the street. The diner closed early. Emily stayed behind to help clean, hoping the extra effort might soften Terry's tone when payday came. When she finally stepped outside, the rain had thinned to a mist. The city's neon lights reflected off every puddle, turning the sidewalks into broken mirrors. Her breath fogged the air as she walked toward the bus stop once again. A few people huddled under the shelter, an elderly woman, a delivery driver, 2 students whispering to each other. Emily stood apart, her hands shoved into her pockets for warmth. When the bus arrived, she reached for her purse and realized, too late, that her wallet was gone. Panic flickered in her chest. She must have left it on the counter at work. The driver looked impatient. "Ma'am, fare, please," she stammered. I left my wallet. Can I just—" But the words tangled. Before she could finish, a familiar voice came from behind her. "I have it," the man said. She turned and saw him, the same stranger from last night, his gray eyes calm under the hood of a dry jacket. He handed the driver exact change and nodded toward Emily. "She is with me." The driver shrugged and waved them aboard. Emily followed, her heart pounding. She sat near the middle, water dripping from her coat, her cheeks flushed with surprise. The man took the seat across the aisle. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engine filled the silence. Finally, she said softly, "You did not have to do that." He smiled faintly. "Consider it repayment." She blinked. "Repayment?" "For the bus fare yesterday," he said. "I told you I would pay you back." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "That is hardly even. You gave me change for a ticket, I gave you $10. Then maybe I still owe you breakfast," he said. She looked away, embarrassed but amused. "Maybe." The bus rolled through the wet streets, passing shuttered shops and glowing street lamps. She noticed his clothes were cleaner today, his posture more confident. Something about him seemed steadier, not like a man struggling at all. When the bus stopped near her street, she stood up. "Thank you again," she said. "I guess kindness really does circle back." His eyes softened. "Maybe that is the only thing that does." "Oh." She stepped off the bus, the mist curling around her as the doors hissed shut behind her. The city was quiet except for the distant hum of traffic. As she walked home, she thought about his words. Kindness circling back. It was such a simple idea, yet it lodged itself in her heart. By the time she reached her building, she felt lighter than she had in weeks. She climbed the stairs, listening to the rain fade into silence. In her small apartment, she changed into dry clothes and sat by the window. Somewhere out there, that man David, she would later learn, was also staring out at the same city, thinking about the girl who had given away her last $10. Neither of them knew it yet, but the wheel of fate had already begun to turn. Morning crept over the city with a dull light, the kind that makes everything look colder than it really is. The rain had finally stopped, but the air still carried the scent of wet pavement and diesel fumes. Emily Parker woke up before her alarm, staring at the ceiling of her tiny apartment. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. She had not slept much. Her thoughts kept circling back to the man from the bus, the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere and paid her fare. The way he had said, "Maybe that is the only thing that does," kept echoing in her mind. Emily rose, pulled on her uniform, and looked around her apartment. A single window overlooked the street. A pot of dying daisies sat on the sill, a gift from her neighbor that she kept watering even though the petals were already turning brown. The fridge held a half carton of milk, 2 eggs, and a note from her landlord reminding her that rent was due on Friday. She rubbed her temples and whispered, 4 days. Oh. The diner opened at 7, and by 6:30 she was already walking down the narrow street, her shoes squeaking against the wet sidewalk. She was halfway to work when she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, miss." She turned and saw a woman in a long beige coat holding an umbrella. "You dropped this," the woman said, handing her a folded slip of paper. Emily blinked. It was her bus transfer from last night, and inside it, tucked neatly, was her missing wallet. Her breath caught. She opened it. Everything was still there, even the crumpled receipts. "Where did you find this?" Emily asked. The woman smiled kindly. "A gentleman dropped it off at the bus depot early this morning. Said to make sure it found its way back to the owner. You must have made quite an impression." Emily stood frozen for a moment, her heart quickening. She thanked the woman and continued walking, the city around her suddenly brighter. She did not even know his name, yet he had gone out of his way to return something that most people would have ignored. It was a small act, but for her, it meant the world. When she arrived at the diner, the morning rush was already underway. The bell over the door jingled nonstop, and the smell of coffee and pancakes filled the air. Terry, her manager, nodded at her from behind the counter. "Good, you are early today," he said. "We are short on help. Ruth called in sick again." Ruth. The name tugged at Emily's heart. Ruth was an elderly woman who volunteered at the church soup kitchen across the street from the diner. Emily sometimes brought her leftover pastries after work. The thought of Ruth reminded her of home of kindness that asked for nothing. At noon, the lunch crowd slowed. Emily took her 10-minute break by the window. Outside, she saw a notice pinned to the church gate. Volunteers needed. Soup kitchen serving dinner daily. Without thinking, she tore off one of the little slips with the phone number. Maybe an extra shift in the evenings would help her catch up on rent. Maybe it would help quiet the restlessness she had been feeling. That night, after work, Emily walked across the street and pushed open the church door. The scent of warm soup and bread drifted through the air. Inside, a handful of volunteers moved between tables, serving plates of stew to people who looked as tired as she felt. At the center of the room stood a tall man in a plain gray sweater, ladling soup into bowls. Her breath caught again. It was him, the stranger from the bus. He looked up and froze for a moment, then smiled, almost shyly. "You," he said softly, setting down the ladle. "I was hoping I would see you again." Emily felt her cheeks warm. "You found my wallet." "I did," he said. "You left it on the seat that night. I figured you might need it more than I needed sleep." She laughed quietly. "You really are something, you know that." He shrugged, smiling. "Just trying to balance the scales." Ruth, who was seated nearby folding napkins, glanced up at them and smiled knowingly. "Looks like you two already know each other," she said. "Good. We need more hands around here." Emily tied an apron around her waist and joined the line. For the next 2 hours, she worked beside him, handing out bread, refilling water, wiping tables. They talked in small bursts between serving meals about the weather, about the city, about small things that did not really matter but somehow felt important. When the last guest left, the kitchen grew quiet except for the clinking of dishes. Emily leaned against the counter, wiping her hands on her apron. "You never told me your name," she said. He hesitated, then answered, "David. David Carter." The name sounded familiar, but she could not place it. "Well, thank you, David Carter, for helping me and for returning my wallet." He smiled faintly. "Maybe one day you will let me return that breakfast too." Emily rolled her eyes but laughed. "We will see." As she stepped outside, the city lights shimmered through a thin fog. She glanced back through the church window and saw David still cleaning, sleeves rolled up, talking with Ruth. Something about him felt real, unguarded. Yet deep inside, she sensed a mystery she could not name. That night, as she walked home, her tiredness felt lighter than usual. She thought about how their paths kept crossing, how kindness seemed to find her no matter how hard life tried to dim it. In her mind, one quiet truth settled. Maybe this was not coincidence at all. Maybe kindness really did circle back, bringing with it something she had not dared to feel in a long time. Hope. The following week unfolded like a quiet rhythm Emily Parker did not want to break. Every evening after her diner shift, she crossed the street to the church soup kitchen. The city's glow softened at that hour, the traffic hum turning into a steady lullaby. Inside the kitchen, the clatter of spoons and the low chatter of volunteers made the world feel warmer, smaller, almost safe. David Carter was there every night, always early, always calm. He moved through the crowded room with an ease that did not fit a man who claimed to be between jobs. His posture was confident, his hands steady as he ladled soup or refilled trays of bread. Emily noticed the small things, the way he listened to everyone who spoke to him, the way he smiled more with his eyes than his mouth. It felt strange to admit, but she looked forward to seeing him. One night, after they finished cleaning up, Ruth motioned them over to the back table. "You two have good teamwork," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "I am getting too old for double shifts. I am trusting you both to handle dinner tomorrow." Emily laughed softly. "We can do that." David glanced at her with a faint grin. "Guess that makes us partners." The next evening, the soup kitchen was busier than usual. A cold front had rolled in, and people sought shelter anywhere they could. Emily worked the serving line, while David handled the kitchen. Between refilling trays and washing pots, he hummed a tune under his breath, a habit that made the work feel lighter somehow. At one point, she caught him looking at her, a quiet look that lingered longer than it should have. When the dinner rush finally slowed, Emily poured herself a cup of coffee and sat near the back door, watching the rain streak the narrow window. David joined her, holding 2 mugs. "Coffee truce?" he asked, offering her one. She smiled, accepting it. Truce. They sat in silence for a moment, the smell of coffee and wet pavement mixing with the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily broke the quiet first. "You never said what you did before this." David hesitated. His thumb traced the rim of his mug. "I used to work in business," he said carefully. "The kind that keeps you up at night wondering if you still have a soul." She raised an eyebrow. "That sounds dramatic." He chuckled softly. "Maybe, but it was true. I had everything that looked like success and nothing that felt like it." Emily studied him. "So you walked away?" "Something like that," he said. "I needed to remember what it felt like to earn an honest meal, to talk to people who were not looking for something from me." His words carried a weight she could not name, but she felt it. "Well," she said finally, "I do not think anyone here wants anything from you except an extra ladle of soup." That made him laugh, a real, unguarded sound that warmed the small space. Later that night, as they closed the kitchen, David handed her a folded piece of paper. "What is this?" she asked. "Tomorrow the church is hosting a small community event," he said. "They are giving free medical checkups and meals. Ruth said they need extra volunteers. I thought maybe you would come." She looked at the flyer, then at him. "You already know I will." The next day, the church hall buzzed with energy. Tables lined with food. Volunteers handing out blankets. Children playing near the back wall. Emily helped with registration while David moved through the crowd, carrying boxes of supplies. He worked quietly, greeting everyone like an old friend. At one point, a man in a dark coat entered the hall, scanning the room with a stern expression. When his eyes landed on David, he stopped. Emily noticed the sudden stiffness in David's shoulders. "Excuse me," the man said sharply, walking over. "David Carter, what in the world are you doing here?" Emily blinked, confused. David's expression shifted, calm but guarded. "Good evening, Mark," he said evenly. "Do not good evening me," the man snapped. "You vanish for months, the board panics, and now I find you ladling soup?" Emily felt the air tighten around them. "Bored?" she asked quietly. Mark glanced at her, then back at David. "You did not tell her?" "Typical." David stepped forward, his voice low but steady. "Not here, Mark. This is not the place." The man scoffed and turned to leave, muttering, "The press will love this." Silence hung heavy after he left. Emily stared at David, her voice barely above a whisper. "Who are you?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Someone who was tired of pretending to be more than human." "You are not between jobs, are you?" "No," he admitted. "I am the one who created them. Carter Enterprises. That was me. Or at least, it used to be." The revelation hit her like a gust of cold air. The man who had borrowed bus fare was not struggling at all. He was the very image of the life she could never imagine reaching. She took a step back, her voice trembling. "You let me think you were just like me." "I never meant to deceive you," he said quickly. "I just wanted to feel real again." Emily shook her head, disbelief clouding her face. "You had no right to turn my life into your experiment." He took a small step toward her. "Emily," but she was already walking away, her apron still in her hand, her heart pounding louder than the rain outside. That night, as she stood at the same bus stop where it all began, the city lights blurred again into streaks of yellow. For the first time, the kindness that had once felt like light now felt like a wound. And somewhere across town, David sat alone in his car, staring at the $10 bill he had kept folded in his wallet, wondering how something so small could mean everything and still not be enough. Rain returned that night, heavier than before, washing the city in silver light. Emily Parker sat by her apartment window, knees drawn close, watching water streak down the glass like threads of memory. She had not spoken to David Carter since the moment she walked out of the church hall. Every word of that confrontation still echoed in her head, his quiet confession, her disbelief, the silence that followed. The next morning, she woke early but did not go to work. Her body moved through the motions, coffee, shower, tying her apron, yet nothing felt solid. She called the diner to say she needed a day off. Terry grumbled but agreed. When she hung up, the apartment fell quiet again, except for the hum of rain against the window. By mid-afternoon, the walls felt too close. She grabbed her coat and stepped outside, walking without a destination. The city seemed larger now, as if every street held a reminder of what she had lost. She found herself standing across from the church, the place where kindness had once felt safe. Through the open doors, she saw Ruth arranging boxes near the back pews. Ruth looked up when Emily entered, her kind face softening. "I wondered when you would come back," she said gently. Emily hesitated. "I just needed to see this place." "Ah." Ruth nodded, motioning her closer. "You are not the first person who has been hurt by something they did not understand." Emily managed a weak smile. "He lied to me." "He hid something," Ruth corrected. "That is not the same as lying. Sometimes people hide the truth because they do not know how to carry it." Emily's voice cracked. "He had everything, Ruth. Money, power, comfort. Why would someone like that pretend to be poor? Why come here?" Ruth paused, her hands resting on the box she was sorting. "Maybe he wanted to remember who he was before all that noise." Emily blinked back tears. "He should have told me." "Maybe," Ruth said softly. "But ask yourself this. Did the man who helped here feel fake to you? The one who returned your wallet, who made you laugh, who stayed late cleaning? That man was real. The rest of it? Maybe that was the disguise." Emily looked down, her chest tight with conflicting emotions. She wanted to stay angry, but Ruth's words found small cracks in her resolve. Ruth reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "He came by last night," she said quietly. "Left this for you." Emily's breath caught. "He did?" Ruth nodded. "Said you would not answer his calls." Emily took the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a photo of the soup kitchen team, her, Ruth, and David standing behind the counter, smiling. Taped to the back of the photo was the $10 bill she had given him that first night. Written in neat handwriting were the words, "You changed more than my bus route. Thank you for reminding me what it means to be human." Her eyes stung. "He kept it all this time," Ruth smiled. "Some people keep diamonds. Others keep what truly saves them." "Oh?" Emily held the bill against her chest for a moment before folding it carefully and putting it back in the envelope. "Where is he now?" "I do not know," Ruth said. "But something tells me he will not stay gone forever." The rain had slowed to a drizzle when Emily left the church. She walked to the bus stop out of habit, the same place where their story had begun. The bench was wet, the metal cold against her palms. She thought about how many times they had both stood there, two strangers trying to get somewhere, both lost in different ways. Across town, in a glass tower that seemed to scrape the gray sky, David sat in his office. The news of his return to Carter Enterprises had spread through the business pages like wildfire. Reporters wanted statements. Investors wanted explanations. His assistant knocked on the door. "Sir, the press conference is ready." He stared out at the skyline, the city lights bleeding into the horizon. "Cancel it," he said quietly. The assistant hesitated. "Cancel it? But the board. Tell them I have nothing to say." When she left, David opened his drawer and took out the framed copy of the same photo Ruth had given Emily. It sat beside the envelope that had once carried the $10 bill. He traced the image with his thumb, stopping over Emily's smile. He whispered, "You gave me back my life, and I gave you pain. I will fix this. Somehow." That evening, he drove through the rain without telling anyone where he was going. His car stopped outside the church, but when he walked inside, the hall was empty. Only the faint echo of their laughter remained in the walls. He noticed the donation box near the door and placed the envelope inside the original bus ticket from that night, still damp around the edges, and a note that read, "For whoever needs a way home." When Emily came by the next morning, she saw the envelope inside the box and knew instantly who had left it. She lifted it gently, her heart both aching and healing all at once. Standing there beneath the tall arched windows, sunlight breaking through the clouds, Emily realized something. Love, like kindness, was never about equality. It was about seeing someone's soul when the world only saw their worth. And even though David was gone again, she knew this was not the end. Fate had a way of circling back, just like kindness always did. A full week passed, but the city did not feel the same. The rain stopped, the air cleared, and sunlight returned to the cracked sidewalks of downtown. Yet something in Emily Parker's chest stayed gray and unsettled. The world moved forward, coffee cups clinking at the diner, buses hissing to a stop, but her thoughts stayed tangled in the memory of David Carter and the words he had left behind. She kept the envelope tucked safely inside her purse, next to her photo ID and the last pay stub she had received. Sometimes, while waiting for customers or standing at the bus stop, she would touch the folded paper and whisper the words he had written. "You changed more than my bus route." Each time she read them, the ache softened just a little. On Thursday morning, Ruth stopped by the diner. The older woman's coat was too big for her small frame, and her hands trembled slightly from the chill. Emily poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. "You are up early," she said. Ruth smiled. "The soup kitchen is running a food drive this weekend. We could use a few extra hands. Are you still on board?" Emily nodded immediately. "Of course." "Oh, good," Ruth said, sipping her coffee. "It will be a big one. You should know, though there might be cameras this time. Some donor from the corporate world is sponsoring the event." Emily froze for half a second but tried to keep her tone casual. "A donor?" Ruth nodded. "Someone from Carter Enterprises." The name landed like a soft punch. Emily forced a smile. "That is generous of them." Ruth studied her carefully. "You sure you are all right with that?" Emily hesitated, then answered truthfully, "I will be fine." When Saturday came, the church hall was full of life again. Tables lined with canned food, volunteers moving in rhythm, children laughing near the corner where boxes were stacked like towers. Emily wore her apron from the diner, sleeves rolled up, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. Ruth directed the teams while the priest spoke to a reporter about the importance of community service. Emily tried to focus on her work, but every time the door opened, her heart gave a quiet, involuntary jump. She told herself she was being foolish. David would not come back here. He had his world, and she had hers. Then, sometime after noon, the hum of voices shifted. People turned their heads toward the entrance. Emily followed their gaze, and there he was. David Carter stood in the doorway, no longer in a gray sweater but in a simple navy suit without a tie. His hair was damp from the drizzle outside, his eyes searching the room until they found her. For a moment, no one else existed. The noise around them faded into the background hum of the city beyond the stained glass windows. He walked toward her slowly. Ruth, sensing the moment, quietly stepped away to give them space. "Hello, Emily," he said softly when he reached her. She stared at him, her heartbeat quick but steady. "You should not be here." "I know," he replied. "But I needed to be." "Oh," she crossed her arms. "You have a company to run, a reputation to fix. You cannot just walk away from that." He smiled faintly. "I did not walk away. I just realized that saving my company meant nothing if I lost what mattered." She shook her head, frustration and longing mixing in her chest. You do not get to say things like that after what happened. I deserve that, he said. But I need you to understand. I was not testing you, Emily. I was testing myself. I had spent so long surrounded by people who only saw my money that I forgot what honesty sounded like. Then you showed up with $10 and no agenda. You reminded me what truth feels like. Emily looked away, blinking back tears. You hurt me, David. I know, he said quietly, and I will carry that. But I came here today because I cannot let your kindness be the only part of our story. Ruth reappeared beside them, her tone brisk but gentle. You two can talk after you help me unload the van. We still have 300 pounds of food to sort. Emily let out a small laugh, wiping her eyes. You heard the lady, she said, handing David a pair of gloves. They worked side by side the rest of the afternoon. Neither said much, but the silence between them had softened. Each box they lifted felt like a word unspoken, each shared glance like a step back toward understanding. When the last van was unloaded and the volunteers began to leave, Ruth approached David with a knowing smile. You did good work today, Mr. Carter. He looked embarrassed. Please, just David. Fine, she said. Then listen to me, David. You cannot fix everything with grand gestures. Sometimes you just have to keep showing up. He nodded. That is what I intend to do. After the event, Emily walked with him to the bus stop. The sky was painted with late afternoon light, gold streaks cutting through gray clouds. The same place where everything had started now felt changed, softer somehow. David reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The foundation is launching a new program for single-income families, he said. Ruth mentioned you were thinking of studying social work. I would like to offer you a position, if you want it. Emily blinked. You want me to work for you? No, he said gently. I want to work with you. She stared at the paper in his hand, the logo of Carter Enterprises printed at the top. After a long pause, she took it. I will think about it. David smiled, relief softening his features. That is all I ask. As the bus arrived, Emily stepped forward. Before boarding, she turned back to him and said quietly, You know, you still owe me breakfast. His laugh was quiet but real. Then that is where we start. The doors closed behind her, and as the bus pulled away, David stood on the curb, watching the reflection of the city lights on the wet asphalt. For the first time in a long time, hope did not feel like a stranger. It felt like something coming home. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of the diner, turning every chrome surface gold. It had been 2 weeks since the food drive, and for the first time in months, Emily Parker felt like her days had rhythm again. The sting between her and David Carter had faded into something quieter, still fragile, but no longer painful. She had accepted his offer to meet with the team at Carter Enterprises' new foundation. It was not an easy decision, but Ruth's words kept echoing in her mind. You cannot heal by running from what hurt you. You heal by turning it into purpose. Now, as she wiped down the counter before the morning rush, her phone buzzed. A text appeared from an unknown number. Good morning, Emily. Meeting today at 10. I will be there. David. Her stomach fluttered. She typed a quick reply. See you then, and slipped the phone back into her pocket. By 9:45, Emily stood in front of the tall glass building that bore his family name, Carter Tower. She had seen it before from the bus window, its mirrored surface catching the light like a piece of the sky. But standing here made her pulse quicken. Inside, the lobby gleamed with marble floors and quiet authority. A receptionist greeted her warmly. You must be Miss Parker. The conference room is this way. Emily followed, her steps echoing softly. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. When she entered the meeting room, David was already there, talking with a woman in a gray suit, his assistant perhaps. He turned when he saw her, his smile gentle but restrained. Emily, he said. I am glad you came. She nodded. I said I would. He gestured toward the table where several folders were laid out. This is what I wanted to show you. The Open Hands Foundation. Our goal is to support community programs, food banks, housing assistance, job training. I wanted you to see how it starts. Emily opened one of the folders. Inside were plans for partnerships with small neighborhood groups, including the church soup kitchen. You are funding Ruth's program, she said quietly. Yes, David replied. She told me it was where I learned what real work feels like. Emily smiled at that. That sounds like her. As the meeting went on, she noticed something in David she had not seen before. He listened more than he spoke. He deferred to others' ideas, even the smallest suggestions. The air around him no longer carried the weight of a man used to command it, carried the warmth of someone learning to share the load. When the others left, David lingered. "I know this place might feel strange to you," he said softly, "but I do not want you to see it as my world. I want you to see it as ours, a place where your ideas can matter too." Emily met his gaze. "I do not know if I belong here." He shook his head. "You do. You are the reason this exists. Without you, I would still be running a company that had forgotten its heart." The sincerity in his voice made her chest tighten. "Then promise me one thing," she said. "Promise me this will never become another publicity trick." "I promise," he said simply. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city stretched out behind him through the tall windows, endless, glittering, alive. Later that afternoon, they walked out together. The sky had turned cloudy again, the air cool with the promise of rain. On the sidewalk, David paused. "Would you have lunch with me? No business talk. Just lunch." Emily hesitated, then nodded. "All right." They found a small cafe 2 blocks away, quiet and tucked beneath a row of maple trees. The waitress recognized David but said nothing. They ordered soup and sandwiches, and for a while, the conversation stayed easy. Books, travel, little things that had nothing to do with money or charity. At one point, Emily laughed at something he said, and for a fleeting second, the heaviness that had once sat between them disappeared completely. She realized how simple it felt, how human. When the check came, David reached for it. "I owe you more than $10, remember?" She smiled. "You are never going to forget that, are you?" "Not in this lifetime," he said. Outside, rain began to fall again, soft at first, then steadier. They stood under the cafe awning, watching people hurry by with umbrellas. David looked at her, his voice almost a whisper. "You know, I used to hate the rain. It reminded me of all the things I could not control. But lately, I have started to think, maybe it is not about control. Maybe it is about cleansing." Emily looked at the streetlights reflecting off the puddles. "Maybe it is about starting over." He nodded slowly. "Yes, starting over sounds right." As the rain thickened, he opened his umbrella and held it over both of them. "Where to?" he asked. "The bus stop," she said with a smile. They walked side by side down the slick sidewalk. Neither spoke, and yet everything that needed to be said hung quietly between them. The apology, the forgiveness, the fragile new beginning. When they reached the stop, Emily turned to him. "You know, this is where all of it started," she said softly. He looked at the bench, the streetlight above it, the wet pavement shining beneath their feet. "Then maybe this is where it starts again," he said. She laughed quietly. "You really think life gives us second chances?" He met her eyes, rain droplets glistening on his hair. "Sometimes it does not give them. Sometimes we have to make them." The bus pulled up with a low hiss, its headlights cutting through the mist. Emily stepped on first, turning back just long enough to see him still standing there under the umbrella, watching her with that same quiet gratitude that had begun their story. As the bus doors closed, the city blurred past her window once more, but this time, the reflection that stared back was no longer of a lonely girl in the rain. It was of a woman who had found her strength, and perhaps something even more unexpected, hope that was learning to love again. By the time autumn arrived, the city had slipped into that soft golden mood between summer and winter. Leaves gathered along the sidewalks, and the air carried the faint smell of roasted chestnuts from street vendors. For Emily Parker, life had finally steadied into something that felt like peace. She now worked full-time with the Open Hands Foundation, the organization David Carter had created. Her role was simple but meaningful, coordinating food drives and outreach programs across low-income neighborhoods. She spent her mornings answering calls, her afternoons in the field, and her evenings planning new ways to reach families who needed help. For the first time, her efforts felt like they truly mattered. David visited the foundation office a few times each week. Their relationship was careful but warm. They spoke easily about work, sometimes about life, but rarely about the night everything changed. It was as if both of them understood that silence was the fragile bridge keeping their connection from collapsing. One Friday evening, Emily stayed late, finishing reports. The last rays of sunlight slipped through the blinds, painting long stripes across her desk. When she finally looked up, she noticed the time. It was past 7. Most of the team had already gone home. As she shut down her computer, she heard the elevator doors open behind her. "Still here?" a familiar voice asked. She turned to see David standing in the doorway, sleeves rolled up, a coffee cup in one hand. "You are one to talk," she said, smiling faintly. "Do CEOs not have somewhere more glamorous to be on a Friday night?" He chuckled softly. "I stopped being that kind of CEO a while ago. Besides, I was nearby and saw the lights still on." He walked closer, setting the coffee on her desk. "You take it. You have earned it." She accepted it gratefully. "Thank you, but I am almost done." "No." David leaned against the edge of the desk, watching her sort through the final stack of papers. "You have done more in 2 months than most departments manage in a year," he said. The board noticed. Emily laughed lightly. "Let me guess. They think it is a miracle that a diner waitress can read a spreadsheet?" He shook his head. "They think it is a miracle that someone remembers why this foundation exists." There was sincerity in his tone that made her pause. "And why does it exist, David?" she asked. He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Because of a girl who gave a stranger $10 when she had nothing. Because she reminded a man who had everything what it means to have a heart." The words hung in the quiet office. Emily looked away, her hands trembling slightly. "Do not say things like that," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because they sound like promises, and promises break people." David's voice softened. "Then let it be a truth, not a promise." Before either of them could say more, a knock came from the open door. Ruth stood there, her expression unreadable. "Sorry to interrupt," she said, holding an envelope. "The evening mail just came. This one is for you, Emily." Emily took it, frowning. The return address bore the logo of a local newspaper. Inside was a printed letter and a clipping. The headline read, "Carter Enterprises CEO spotted in secret relationship with employee from his charity foundation." Below it was a blurred photograph David and Emily at the cafe from weeks ago, sitting close under the awning while rain fell around them. Her stomach dropped. "Oh no," she whispered. David's jaw tightened. "They followed us." Ruth looked at them both gravely. "You need to be careful. This could turn ugly fast." Emily set the paper down, her hands shaking. "They make it sound like some scandal. Like I am—" She stopped herself, her voice breaking. "I did not do anything wrong." "I know," David said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. But the foundation, your company, what will they say?" "I will handle it," he said. "You stay out of it." She stared at him, fear and frustration mixing in her chest. "Handle it how? By pretending it never happened?" "By protecting you," he replied quietly. "David, I do not need protection. I need honesty." "Nah." The tension between them pulsed like static in the air. Ruth stepped forward, her voice calm but steady. "Both of you, listen to me. The truth has a way of surviving lies, but only if you stand in it together." Emily exhaled slowly. "She is right. I am not going to hide." David hesitated, then nodded. "Then we tell the truth. Tomorrow morning, I will hold a press briefing. You can stand beside me if you want or not. It is your choice." She met his eyes. "If I do not stand there, it will look like shame, and I am not ashamed of kindness." He smiled faintly, pride glinting in his tired eyes. "Then we face it together." That night, Emily barely slept. The image of that headline replayed in her mind again and again, the cruel twist of words trying to turn compassion into scandal. But beneath the fear, something steadier lived, a quiet certainty that she was done hiding from storms. Morning came gray and cold. The foundation lobby filled with reporters. Cameras flashed, voices buzzed. Emily stood near the podium, her heart racing but her posture steady. David approached the microphone. He spoke clearly, his voice carrying across the room. "The woman you saw in those photos is not a scandal. She is the reason this foundation exists. Her name is Emily Parker. 2 years ago, she gave a stranger her last $10 so he could catch a bus home. That stranger was me. And today, I stand here to say that kindness is not weakness, it is the reason we are rebuilding this company with integrity." The room fell silent. Cameras clicked, but no one interrupted. David looked at Emily then, eyes steady, and said softly, "I am not ashamed of the truth." And as the flashbulbs burst like small explosions of light, Emily felt something inside her lift. The world might still judge them, but the truth now belonged to both of them, and no one could twist it again. The press conference changed everything. By the next morning, the story was everywhere. Television anchors replayed David Carter's words again and again, and newspapers ran front-page headlines about the billionaire who defended a waitress. Some praised him for his honesty, others called it reckless. But for Emily Parker, it felt like standing in the eye of a storm, still and silent while the world spun wildly around her. She returned to her small apartment that evening to find a crowd of reporters waiting outside. Flashing cameras filled the narrow hallway. Voices overlapped. "Emily, do you love him? Did he pay you to keep quiet? Are you planning to marry him?" She pressed through them, keeping her eyes on the door, and finally shut herself inside. Her heart pounded. The city noise below mixed with the echo of her own pulse. Her phone buzzed nonstop texts from friends, from coworkers at the diner, even from strangers on social media. Some messages were kind, others cruel. One said, "You are an inspiration." Another read, "You are just another girl chasing money." She set the phone down and covered her face with both hands. A gentle knock came at her door. "Emily, it is Ruth," said the familiar voice. Emily opened the door and almost collapsed with relief at the sight of her friend. Ruth stepped inside, carrying a small paper bag. "I brought soup," she said, setting it on the table. "It is not much, but it is warm." Emily tried to smile. "Thank you." Ruth sat across from her, studying her carefully. "You look like you have not eaten all day." "I have not," Emily admitted. "It feels like everyone in the world suddenly knows my name, and they have all decided what kind of person I am." Ruth reached over and took her hand. "The world talks fast and forgets faster. What matters is what you know about yourself." Emily nodded slowly. "I just wish the noise would stop." "It will," Ruth said softly, "but you have to decide what you want to do now. Hide or stand tall." Before Emily could answer, her phone rang again. This time, it was David. She hesitated before picking it up. "Hello, Emily." His voice was calm but strained. "Are you all right?" "Not really," she said quietly. "There are people outside my door. They are shouting questions I do not have answers for." "I am sorry," he said. "I should have thought this through. I wanted to protect you, not expose you." She sighed. "You told the truth. I cannot fault you for that. But what now?" "I want you to come to the foundation tomorrow," he said. "There is something you should see." The next morning, Emily arrived before dawn. The building was quiet, except for the low hum of security guards setting up barricades outside. When she stepped inside, she found David in the lobby, talking to a group of volunteers. At the center of the room stood a long table covered in donations, letters, small gifts, and envelopes sent from across the country. David turned to her. "These came overnight," he said. "People saw the press conference. They were moved." Emily opened one of the envelopes. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for reminding us that kindness still matters." Another envelope held 10 $1 bills with a message. "This is all I can give, but maybe it helps someone get home." Tears welled in her eyes. "They are giving back," she whispered. "Yes," David said, "because you gave first." The moment felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. For the first time since the scandal began, she felt something stronger than fear purpose. By noon, news crews had gathered again, but this time, the cameras were focused not on gossip, but on the growing number of people lining up to donate. The story had turned. What began as a tabloid headline was becoming a movement. When the reporters asked her for a comment, Emily spoke clearly. "Kindness should never be a headline. It should be a habit. What happened between us started with $10 on a rainy night, but it was never about money. It was about what we choose to do when no one is watching." Her words spread across social media, echoing far beyond the city. People began using the phrase, "Every kindness counts," as a hashtag, sharing stories of small acts of generosity. That evening, the board of Carter Enterprises called an emergency meeting. Some executives wanted David to step down, claiming he had turned the company into a charity project. Others argued that his honesty had brought the brand more trust than any marketing campaign could have achieved. David listened quietly, then stood. "If you want to remove me, go ahead," he said. "But I will not apologize for telling the truth or for building something that helps people. A business without humanity is just a machine." The room fell silent. No one voted against him. Later that night, he met Emily at the church, the place where everything had once begun to fall apart. The candles flickered softly as they sat together in the pews. "I saw the news," she said. "They are calling you the People's CEO." He laughed lightly. "That title sounds ridiculous." "But it fits," she said. David looked at her, his voice low and sincere. "Do you regret any of this?" She thought for a moment. "I regret how painful it was," she said. "But not what it revealed." He nodded slowly. "Me too." Outside, rain began to fall again, gentle this time, like a memory returning. Emily glanced toward the doorway and smiled faintly. "Looks like the rain always finds us." David followed her gaze. "Maybe it just likes reminding us where we started." They sat in silence for a long while, listening to the steady rhythm of water against the church roof. The storm that had once torn their lives apart had somehow brought them back to the same place together, changed, and stronger for it. Autumn deepened, and the city slowly breathed again after the storm of headlines and opinions. The scandal that had once filled every newsfeed began to fade, replaced by newer stories and louder controversies. Yet, for Emily Parker and David Carter, what remained was not silence but purpose. They had survived the chaos, and something steadier had begun to grow in its place: trust. The Open Hands Foundation expanded faster than either of them expected. Donations poured in from across the country, and new partnerships formed with community groups that had once struggled to stay open. The office buzzed with energy, the kind that came from hope finally having direction. Emily found herself leading more meetings, her voice gaining confidence. She was no longer the shy waitress who hesitated to speak. Now she stood before teams of volunteers, explaining plans, organizing schedules, inspiring others to believe that small kindnesses could move mountains. Ruth often watched from the back of the room, her eyes shining with quiet pride. One chilly morning, Emily arrived early to find David standing by the large windows overlooking the city. Sunlight caught in his hair, and for a moment, he looked less like a powerful man and more like someone at peace. "You are here before everyone again," she said with a small smile. He turned toward her. "Old habits. When I wake up early, the city still feels honest." She joined him by the window. Below them, buses rumbled, street vendors opened carts, and life began its usual rhythm. "It is funny," she said softly. "A few months ago, I used to look up at these towers and think people inside them must have everything figured out." He smiled faintly. "And now? Now I know better. Everyone is just trying to hold on to something real." He nodded slowly. "You helped me remember that." They stood in silence for a while, the quiet comfortable. Then David spoke again. "The board has agreed to spin off the foundation as an independent organization," he said. "You will be in charge." Emily turned to him, startled. "What do you mean, me?" "I mean," he said with a calm certainty, "that you built its heart. You understand it better than anyone." She shook her head. "I cannot run something like this." "Yes, you can," he said. "You already are." The sincerity in his tone left her speechless. She looked out at the city again, her reflection blending with his in the glass. "You are really serious about this?" "I am," he said. "You once told me kindness should be a habit, not a headline." "Let us prove it." Her voice was quiet but sure. "Then we do it together," he smiled. "Together sounds right." "1. As the day went on, the foundation office filled with laughter and motion. Reporters no longer came to expose secrets but to celebrate progress. The once skeptical city began to see the foundation not as a billionaire's redemption story, but as a living, breathing movement for change. That evening, Emily and Ruth stayed late, sorting boxes for another food drive. David brought in dinner, warm sandwiches and coffee. They sat around the table, tired but content. Ruth looked at them both, her tone teasing but affectionate. "You two started all this with a bus ticket and $10. Imagine what the next 10 years could bring." Emily laughed, glancing at David. "Let us just make it through the next week first." Outside, the city lights shimmered against the dark sky, and a gentle wind rattled the windows. David leaned back, watching Emily talk with Ruth, and felt something he had not felt in years, peace unclouded by guilt. The chaos was behind them, but their journey was far from over. Somewhere deep inside, he knew there would be more challenges ahead. Power never surrendered easily, and truth always demanded courage. But for the first time, he was not facing it alone. When Emily stood to leave, David handed her a small frame wrapped in paper. "Open it when you get home," he said quietly. Later that night, in her apartment, Emily unwrapped it. Inside was the same $10 bill she had once given to a stranger on a rainy night, now pressed behind glass, framed with a single engraved line, "Every kindness counts." She smiled through tears. The story that had begun with a single act of generosity had come full circle, not as a fairy tale, but as something far more lasting, a reminder that love built on honesty could survive anything, and that sometimes the smallest choices truly did change everything. Winter crept into the city slowly, frosting the windows of corner cafes and painting the skyline with pale silver light. Inside the modest office of the Open Hands Foundation, space heaters hummed softly, and volunteers worked in warm sweaters and wool hats. Emily Parker had grown used to the rhythm of this new life: meetings, deliveries, late nights planning community projects that reached farther than she ever imagined. Yet beneath the steady calm, change was brewing again. She could sense it in David Carter's silence. He had been distant these past few weeks, more time in meetings with the corporate board, more quiet looks out the window that never reached his smile. One evening, after most of the team had left, Emily found him still in the conference room. The lights outside the tall windows flickered as snow began to fall. He stood at the far end of the table, his hands resting on a folder. "You should go home, David," she said gently. "It is late." "Oh." He looked up, startled from his thoughts. "I will, soon," he said. Then he hesitated. "Actually, I was hoping you would stay for a moment." Emily walked closer. "What is wrong?" He exhaled slowly. "The board is changing direction again. They want to separate the foundation entirely from Carter Enterprises. Not as a gift, but as a divestment." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means they want to withdraw funding after this fiscal year," he explained quietly. "They say the foundation is no longer profitable for the company's image. Too much focus on charity, not enough on business." Her heart sank. "But the programs, we have families depending on us." "I know," he said, "and I'm not going to let them shut it down." She studied him, reading the tension in his shoulders. "What are you planning?" He looked at her with quiet resolve. "I am buying the foundation myself, personally. No shareholders, no corporate board. Just us." Emily blinked. "That is a huge risk." He nodded. "Maybe, but I took greater risks, building things that meant nothing. I am not afraid to risk something that matters." She felt a lump in her throat. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "But I cannot do it alone. If I take full ownership, I want you beside me, not just as a manager, but as co-director." The words stunned her. "David, I do not know if I am ready for that." He smiled faintly. "You were ready the day you gave a stranger your last $10. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Snowflakes drifted past the glass, catching the office light as they fell. Emily finally whispered, "If we do this, it has to stay honest. No secrets, no grand speeches, just work." He nodded. "Agreed." That night, they began the paperwork together. Hours passed as they read through legal forms, budget sheets, and agreements. By midnight, the deal was nearly finalized. The Open Hands Foundation would become independent, sustained by new partnerships and David's personal support. As they finished, David leaned back in his chair. "Do you remember what you said the night we met?" he asked. Emily smiled faintly. "I said, 'There goes my breakfast,'" he laughed softly. "Yes, and I remember thinking that no one had ever looked more generous while being that poor." She rolled her eyes, but her expression softened. "And I remember thinking you were the most awkward stranger I had ever met." They both laughed quietly, the sound warm against the hum of the heater. Then David's tone grew thoughtful. "It feels strange, does it not? How everything can change because of one small moment." Emily nodded. "Kindness has ripples. You never know how far they reach." He smiled. "You taught me that." The next morning, news spread quietly among the staff. The Open Hands Foundation was officially independent. There were no press releases or public announcements, only an email that read, "Effective immediately, the Open Hands Foundation will operate as a freestanding nonprofit organization dedicated to community support and kindness-based outreach. Every act of good begins with one choice." The message ended simply, "Every kindness counts." Volunteers cheered, some teared up, and Ruth hugged Emily tightly. "You did it!" she whispered. Emily shook her head. "We did it." Later that afternoon, as the snow piled along the sidewalks, Emily stood by the window again. The city below seemed softer under the white blanket. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, one where her work could build something that lasted. David joined her quietly, holding 2 cups of coffee. "For the record," he said, "this place finally feels alive again." She took the cup, smiling. "Because it is no longer about saving an image. It is about saving people." He looked at her, his voice quiet but certain. "You have become the heartbeat of this foundation, Emily. I hope you know that." Her cheeks warmed under his gaze. "Then I guess we just have to make sure it keeps beating." Snow continued to fall, soft and endless. As they stood side by side, 2 people bound not by wealth or circumstance, but by a shared promise to keep building something kind in a world that often forgot how. And though neither said it out loud, both knew that this new beginning was not just about charity or redemption. It was about trust finally finding its home. Snow melted into spring, and the city woke with new energy. The parks filled with the sound of laughter, the streets shimmered under sunlight, and the air smelled faintly of blooming trees. Inside the Open Hands Foundation, the team was busier than ever planning a new scholarship program for low-income students, a community clinic partnership, and a citywide food drive. Emily Parker had grown into her role as co-director with quiet grace. Her days began early, her coffee always half drunk before meetings started. Her nights ended late, reviewing budgets and volunteer rosters. Yet, despite the exhaustion, there was a peace in her work that money could not buy. David Carter often joined her in the early mornings. He was no longer the untouchable CEO who lived in headlines. He dressed simply, worked quietly, and spent most of his time in the field rather than the boardroom. People in the community called him Mr. David, never Mr. Carter. And he seemed to prefer it that way. One warm Friday afternoon, Emily stepped out of the office to check on the setup for their outdoor event in Central Park. Tables were lined with donation boxes, banners fluttered in the gentle wind. Children ran across the grass while volunteers arranged supplies. The foundation had grown beyond what either of them imagined. As she walked through the crowd, she spotted David talking to a group of local business owners. His sleeves were rolled up, his tie gone, his laugh easy. For a moment, she just watched, remembering the man she first met at a rainy bus stop, unsure and lost. The difference was remarkable, yet something about his eyes was exactly the same. When he noticed her, he waved her over. "Come here, Emily. They need your magic." She smiled. "Magic or just my clipboard?" "Same thing," he said, grinning. They spent the next few hours coordinating logistics, greeting donors, and handing out flyers. Everything went smoothly until a familiar face appeared near the edge of the crowd, Mark, the stern board member who had once confronted David at the soup kitchen months ago. He approached with the practiced politeness of someone who never wasted a move. "David," he said, shaking hands, "I see independence has not slowed you down." David's tone remained calm. "Hello, Mark. To what do I owe the visit?" "Pure curiosity," Mark said. "You left the company making headlines and came out with this public crusade. Some people at the firm think it is admirable. Others think it is sentimental." David smiled slightly. "I am fine with both." Mark's eyes flicked toward Emily. "And this must be your partner, the one who made every kindness count." Emily met his gaze steadily. "That is me." He studied her for a moment. "You have done something rare, made the impossible look simple." "Nothing about it was simple," she said quietly. Mark gave a small nod, the faintest trace of respect crossing his face. "Maybe simplicity is overrated," he said before walking away. After he left, Emily turned to David. "Do you think he meant that as a compliment?" David chuckled. "With Mark, that is as close as it gets." The rest of the afternoon passed peacefully. As the sun began to set, volunteers gathered for closing speeches. Ruth, now fully recovered from a brief illness, stood before the small crowd with a microphone. "We started with $10, she said proudly. "One act of kindness on a rainy night. Look at what it became." Applause rippled through the crowd. David took the microphone next, his voice steady and warm. "This foundation is not mine," he said. "It belongs to everyone who believes that compassion still matters. Every can of food, every hour volunteered, every smile shared, it all counts. It all changes lives." When he handed the microphone to Emily, she hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. The crowd waited, quiet and expectant. "I used to think kindness was something small," she began. "Something people did when they had extra time or extra money. But I learned that it is not small, it is powerful. Kindness does not fix the world overnight, but it reminds us that the world is still worth fixing." The audience applauded, and she caught David's gaze across the small stage. His eyes said everything words could not. Later that evening, after the event ended, they walked together along the park path. The city lights shimmered in the reflection of the pond, and the hum of traffic sounded distant, gentle. David broke the silence first. "You spoke beautifully today," she smiled. "You always say that." "Because it is always true," he replied. They stopped near the bus stop on the park's edge. The same kind of bus that once carried their fate rumbled by, empty this time. "Funny how life circles back," she said softly. David nodded. "Almost like it wants us to remember." She looked at him for a long moment. "Do you ever think about that night?" "Every day," he said quietly. "It reminds me that the smallest decision can change an entire life. One act, one moment, one person." A gentle breeze rustled through the trees. Emily took a deep breath. "I guess that means the real question is, what do we do with the life we changed?" He smiled, eyes soft under the streetlight. "We keep giving it meaning." They stood there, side by side, while the city moved quietly around them. For the first time since the day they met, Emily did not feel like a stranger to her own story. She felt part of something larger, a story built on truth, kindness, and the courage to begin again. And as the lights of the bus disappeared into the distance, both of them knew that whatever waited ahead, they would face it not as two different worlds colliding, but as one purpose shared. Summer arrived with long days and skies, so blue they looked painted. The city pulsed with life again. And the Open Hands Foundation was in full motion, launching new programs, mentoring interns, and expanding to nearby towns. Every week brought new challenges, but also new victories. Emily Parker had learned to balance spreadsheets with compassion, and boardrooms with street corners where volunteers handed out food. To everyone who met her, she seemed unshakable. But inside, she still carried a quiet uncertainty. The foundation was thriving, yet part of her wondered what came next. She had built something meaningful with David Carter, but their personal connection, whatever it had once been, was suspended in a space between friendship and something more. David, for his part, was busier than ever. His time was split between overseeing the foundation and dealing with the remnants of his corporate empire. He had become the public face of humility and reform, the CEO who chose compassion, as one newspaper called him. Yet every time he stepped in front of a camera, his eyes seemed to search the crowd for someone specific. One warm evening, Emily stayed late at the office. The building was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning. She was reviewing paperwork for an upcoming grant proposal when Ruth appeared at her door, holding 2 cups of tea. "You need to stop working before the clock forgets how to turn," Ruth teased. Emily smiled tiredly. "If I stop now, the grant might not go through." Ruth handed her a cup. "You sound just like him." Emily looked up. "Like who?" "David," Ruth said. "Always chasing the next good thing before he allows himself to rest." Emily set the papers down. "He has been different lately. Distant, maybe. I think the board at Carter Enterprises is giving him trouble again." Ruth nodded. "He carries the weight of too many promises. People like him always do." She took a slow sip of tea, then added softly, "You should talk to him, Emily. Sometimes silence hurts more than any truth." The next morning, Emily took her advice. She found David in the foundation's rooftop garden, a space they had built for reflection, surrounded by plants and benches overlooking the skyline. He was sitting alone, reviewing notes, a faint crease between his brows. "Still trying to save the world before breakfast?" she asked, stepping closer. He looked up and smiled, the tension easing from his face. "Someone has to." She sat beside him. "You have not been yourself lately." He sighed. "The board at Carter Enterprises wants me to return full-time. They are offering new contracts, partnerships, everything. They think this," he gestured around them, "is just a side project." "Blah. And what do you think?" "I think this is the only thing that ever made sense," he said quietly. "But walking away from them completely means losing influence that could still help." Emily studied him for a long moment. "You cannot save both worlds if one keeps trying to destroy the other." He turned toward her, his gaze steady. "And which world do you think I belong to?" "The one that needs you, not the one that owns you," she said simply. The wind caught a loose strand of her hair, brushing it across her face. He reached out instinctively, tucking it gently behind her ear. The small gesture carried more emotion than words could hold. "I do not know what I would do without you here," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "You would still find a way to help people. You always do." He shook his head. "No, Emily, you are the reason I do." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city below seemed to fade, replaced by the quiet thrum of hearts that had carried each other through storms. Then Emily stood, breaking the silence before it grew too heavy. "You should go home. Get some rest." He nodded but did not move. "Emily," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if I ever had to choose between saving a company or protecting what we built here, I would choose this every time." She paused at the door. "Then make sure you keep that promise." Days passed, and the pressure from Carter Enterprises intensified. News outlets began speculating that David might step down from the foundation to return as full-time CEO. Donors grew nervous. Volunteers whispered. Emily tried to stay calm, but she could feel the foundation's fragile peace slipping. One evening, while reviewing reports, she received a text from an unknown number. "Check tomorrow's headlines." The next morning, every news outlet carried the same story. David Carter resigns from Open Hands Foundation, rumors of corporate return confirmed. Emily's heart dropped. She rushed to the office, finding reporters already camped outside. Inside, staff whispered anxiously. "Is it true?" someone asked. "Is he leaving us?" She did not answer. Instead, she went straight to his office. The door was open, and David stood by the window, looking out over the city. "You could have told me," she said quietly. He turned, his face unreadable. "I was going to, after the paperwork cleared. I wanted to explain everything first." "So it is true," she said, her voice trembling. He took a step forward. "Emily, listen to me. I am not abandoning the foundation. I am going back to fight for it. If I have control over the parent company, I can protect us from every threat. This is the only way." She stared at him, her eyes filled with hurt. "And you did not think to tell me before the world did?" "I wanted to spare you the chaos," he said softly. She shook her head. "You promised no more secrets." The words hit him harder than she knew. "You are right," he said quietly. "I broke that promise." Emily looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "I hope what you are fighting for is worth what it costs." She turned and walked out before he could answer. That night, as rain began to fall again over the city, David stayed in his office long after everyone left. On his desk sat the framed $10 bill, the one that had started it all. He stared at it, whispering to himself, "Every kindness counts, even the ones that hurt." He did not know it yet, but this new storm would test both of them in ways neither had imagined. The week that followed was a blur of confusion, headlines, and unanswered questions. The newspapers showed David Carter's face everywhere, calling his decision a strategic return to power. Analysts debated whether his comeback to Carter Enterprises was a masterstroke or a betrayal. But inside the Open Hands Foundation, silence replaced noise. Volunteers avoided eye contact, staff whispered in the hallways, and the warmth that once filled the office now felt thin and fragile. Emily Parker kept her focus on the work. She told herself that projects still needed to move forward, that people still depended on them. Yet no matter how she tried, her mind kept drifting back to the last conversation she had with David, the quiet pain in his voice when he said he was doing it for them. 3 days after the news broke, Ruth came into Emily's office carrying a newspaper folded under her arm. "You have seen this, right?" she asked. Emily nodded. "Every version of it." Ruth set the paper down and studied her carefully. "You are angry," Emily sighed. "I am tired, Ruth." "Angry, yes, but mostly tired of feeling like every truth I hold gets rewritten by someone else's story." Ruth sat down across from her. "He made his choice. Maybe it is time you make yours." Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean decide what you want this place to be," Ruth said. "If David really did leave to protect the foundation, then you have to prove him right. And if he did not, you still have to prove that kindness does not collapse when leadership changes." Emily looked down at her hands, the same hands that once carried coffee trays and wiped diner counters. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple," Ruth said gently, "but it is necessary." That night, Emily stayed late again. The office lights glowed softly against the dark city skyline. The foundation felt emptier without David's quiet presence, the shared coffee cups, the after-hours laughter. Yet somewhere deep inside, she knew this was the test every dream eventually faced. Around 9, her phone buzzed. It was an email from David. Subject: "For tomorrow." She hesitated before opening it. Inside was a short message. "They will try to use the foundation as leverage to force me into deals I will not accept. They want to claim it under corporate assets again. I will not let that happen. You may face questions tomorrow, maybe worse. Trust the work, not the noise. David." She read the message 3 times, then closed her laptop, a quiet determination settling over her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she would not let anyone take away what they had built. The next morning, the storm hit. Reporters flooded the foundation lobby, demanding statements about David's return to power. Some accused the foundation of being a corporate cover-up. Others claimed it was collapsing without him. Emily faced the cameras alone. At the press podium, she stood tall, the flash of lights reflecting in her calm eyes. "The Open Hands Foundation was never about one person," she said clearly. "It is about people helping each other, no matter where they come from. Our mission stands, our work continues, and our doors stay open. Kindness does not belong to a company, it belongs to everyone." Her voice carried strength she did not realize she had. By the time she stepped off the podium, the questions had turned softer. Reporters were no longer looking for a scandal, they were looking for hope. That afternoon, she received a call from an unknown number. When she answered, David's voice came through, quiet and steady. "I saw the press conference," he said. "I did what you would have done," she replied. "No," he said. "You did better." Emily exhaled slowly. "Are you all right?" "I am holding," he said. "The board is divided. Some want me out. Others want to use me. But I am fighting for the foundation to stay independent, no matter the outcome." There was a pause on the line. "You do not have to carry this alone anymore, David," she said softly. His voice broke just slightly. "You are the only reason I can carry it at all." Neither spoke for a moment, the silence between them heavier than words. Finally, she said, "Whatever happens next, you have people who believe in what you started. Do not forget that." "Oh, I will not," he promised. That evening, after the call ended, Emily walked through the foundation's main hall. Volunteers were packing food boxes, laughing softly as they worked. Ruth was helping a young mother fill out an application for housing assistance. The hum of ordinary kindness filled the space. Emily stopped beside the framed photograph on the wall, the one from the first soup kitchen event, where she and David stood side by side, raincoats dripping, both smiling despite exhaustion. Beneath it, a plaque read, "One act of kindness can change the direction of a life." She touched the edge of the frame and whispered, "Then let it keep changing." Outside, the evening lights of the city shimmered like reflections on water. Somewhere across town, in a tall corporate building with glass walls and endless meetings, David Carter sat alone in a boardroom, staring at his phone. The last message he received was from Emily. "We are still standing." He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "So am I." The storm was far from over. But for both of them, something had shifted. The fight was no longer about saving a company or a reputation. It was about protecting the truth they had built together. And even though they were miles apart, the same quiet conviction lived in both of their hearts. Kindness, once given, never truly leaves. It only finds new ways to return. Days passed like pages turning in a heavy book. The city seemed caught between seasons again, spring sunlight warming the streets, yet cold winds still whispering through the alleys. Inside the Open Hands Foundation, life returned to its steady rhythm, but a quiet tension lingered beneath every smile. Emily Parker carried herself with composure, yet her thoughts kept drifting toward David Carter, wondering how his battle at Carter Enterprises was unfolding. Rumors trickled in through news reports. Some said David was winning back full control of the company. Others claimed the board was preparing to oust him permanently. Emily tried not to listen, focusing instead on her work. But every headline felt personal. She knew how much he had risked for the foundation and for her. One gray afternoon, Ruth entered Emily's office with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "You need this," she said, setting one down. Emily smiled faintly. "How do you always know?" "Because I have seen that look before," Ruth replied. "You are waiting for something." Emily hesitated. "Maybe I am waiting for news that everything will be all right." Ruth took a slow sip of coffee. "You already know the truth. Everything will not be all right all at once. It never is. But it can be right enough to keep going." Before Emily could answer, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. The caller ID read, "David Carter." Her heart skipped a beat. She answered quickly. "David?" His voice came through, steady but tired. "It is done. The board voted today." She held her breath. "And?" "I am out," he said quietly. "Completely." For a long moment, Emily said nothing. The world seemed to pause around her. "I am so sorry," she finally whispered. "Do not be," he said. "They think they won, but what they really did was set me free." She felt her throat tighten. "What will you do now?" He took a deep breath before answering. "I am coming home, Emily." Those words echoed in her mind long after the call ended. She looked out the window, the city skyline stretching before her, and realized she was smiling for the first time in days. That evening, as the sun began to set, David arrived at the foundation. He looked different, no expensive suit, no boardroom tension in his posture. Just a man who had laid down the armor he no longer needed. When he walked into the main hall, the volunteers broke into quiet applause. Ruth shook his hand warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. Carter," she said with a twinkle in her eye. He smiled. "Just David, please." Then his gaze found Emily across the room. She was standing near the donation tables, her expression soft but steady. "You came back," she said simply. "I told you I would," he replied. They stood in silence for a heartbeat before she added, "Then let us get back to work. We have people counting on us." He nodded, a genuine smile spreading across his face. Together, as always. As evening settled over the city, the lights inside the foundation glowed brighter than ever. The storm had passed, and though scars remained, they now carried something stronger than before: faith, not in perfection, but in purpose. For the first time in a long time, both of them felt it clearly. This was not the end of their story. It was the beginning of everything they had been fighting for. The weeks that followed felt lighter, as if the air itself had changed. Without the weight of corporate battles, David Carter moved through life with a quiet peace he had never known. He arrived at the Open Hands Foundation every morning before sunrise, helping volunteers unload boxes, laughing easily with the team, and sharing coffee with Ruth before the day began. There was no entourage, no meetings filled with hidden motives, just work that mattered. Emily Parker noticed the change immediately. The sharp tension that once followed him, like a shadow, was gone. He was still a man of vision and determination, but his energy had softened. Now, when he spoke to people, he listened fully. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. One morning, as they prepared for a community breakfast event, Emily found him in the storage room, stacking canned goods. "You know," she said, "most former CEOs would have someone else doing that." David looked up, grinning. "I guess I am not most former CEOs." She shook her head with a laugh. "You never were." They carried the boxes together into the hall, where Ruth was arranging chairs. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air, and sunlight streamed through the high windows, catching dust in golden streaks. Dozens of families would soon arrive, people who had once stood in line for food now volunteering to serve others. As they worked, Emily caught herself glancing at David more often than she meant to. Something in the way he moved, the quiet ease, The unspoken gratitude made her heart ache in a way she could not name. After the event, the two of them stayed behind to clean up. The hall was empty now, filled only with the echo of laughter that had passed through earlier. Emily gathered leftover bread while David wiped the tables. "You did something good today," she said softly. "So did you," he replied. "You always do." She looked down at the table, tracing a small circle on the surface with her cloth. "I used to think my life would always be small," she admitted. "That I would work in the diner forever. That people like you lived in another world entirely." He paused, setting the cloth aside. "You changed that world, Emily. You did not just walk into it, you transformed it." Her throat tightened. "I did not do it alone." "No," he said quietly. "You did it with love, the kind that makes people believe again." The silence that followed was soft and full, the kind that carried more meaning than any words. Then, with a small smile, Emily said, "You know, if you keep saying things like that, people will think you are a poet instead of a businessman." David laughed. "Maybe I am finally learning that kindness and poetry are the same thing." Outside, the afternoon sun had begun to dip, painting the city in shades of amber. Emily turned toward the doorway, her voice gentle. "Come on, Mr. Poet, we still have boxes to carry." He followed her out, his heart lighter than it had been in years. And as the doors of the foundation closed behind them, both of them knew that what they were building was more than charity. It was healing, quiet, steady, and unstoppable. Summer turned the city golden again, and with it came a new wave of energy at the Open Hands Foundation. Applications for community grants flooded in, volunteers filled every available hour, and local newspapers began calling the foundation the heart of the city. For Emily Parker, every sunrise began with gratitude, and every sunset ended in quiet exhaustion. But deep inside, something softer was beginning to bloom. Something she had not dared to name. David Carter had become a constant presence, not as a boss or benefactor, but as a partner in purpose. They worked side by side, shared laughter in long afternoons, and learned the kind of peace that only came from building something meaningful together. Yet even with all the progress, Emily sometimes caught herself watching him from across the room, wondering how someone who once seemed untouchable could now feel so near. One humid morning, as the city buzzed outside with traffic and the hum of life, Emily arrived early to find David already in the courtyard. He was repairing a broken garden bench, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of paint across his forearm. She smiled faintly. "You know, you could have called maintenance for that." "Oh," he looked up with a grin. "And missed the chance to actually fix something myself?" "Never." She leaned against the doorway, arms folded. "You are different, you know. Not the man who first walked into that soup kitchen pretending to be someone else." He set the paintbrush down. "Maybe I am finally becoming the man I should have been all along." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air between them carried something fragile and warm, like sunlight through thin glass. That afternoon, the foundation hosted a special luncheon to celebrate its anniversary. Community leaders, former volunteers, and families whose lives had changed through their programs all came together. The main hall glowed with decorations made by local children, paper hearts, hand-painted signs, and photos of the first year's milestones. Ruth, standing at the podium, spoke first. "This place began with a $10 act of kindness," she said, smiling at Emily and David. "And today, it stands as proof that compassion can build empires stronger than money ever could." The crowd applauded. David followed her, taking the microphone. "I used to believe success was measured in profits," he said. "But now I know it is measured in people, how many we help, how many we lift. I am standing here today not because of business, but because one woman reminded me what being human means." His eyes found Emily's across the room. She looked down, blushing, but the emotion on her face was unmistakable pride, humility, and a love she could not hide. When it was her turn to speak, she took the microphone with steady hands. "I did not set out to change anyone's life," she said. "I only did what I thought was right in a small moment. But that moment grew. It grew because people believed. It grew because one person," her gaze lifted toward David, "chose to see worth where others saw weakness." The room fell quiet. Then someone began to clap, and soon the applause filled the hall. After the event ended, the crowd slowly dispersed, leaving behind the scent of flowers and the echo of music. Emily stepped outside for air. The evening light had turned soft, painting the city in hues of gold and rose. She stood by the railing, watching the last guests leave, when she heard footsteps behind her. David joined her, his jacket slung over his shoulder. "You were incredible in there," he said. She smiled. "You were too." He leaned on the railing beside her. "You know, for a long time I thought redemption meant erasing who I was. But I think it just means using what I have left to make something good." She looked at him gently. "You have made something good, David. You gave people hope." He turned toward her, his expression soft. "You gave me mine." The breeze lifted strands of her hair, and for a moment, the city noise faded away. Their eyes met steady, searching, unguarded. Emily spoke first, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am not sure what happens next." David smiled faintly. "Neither am I, but I know it will not happen without you." Her chest tightened at his words. "Do you really mean that?" He nodded. "I do. You are the only thing that ever felt real in all of this." She looked away for a moment, her heart racing, then turned back to him with quiet strength. "Then promise me something," she said. "Promise me this will never become about power again. Promise me it stays about people." He reached out and took her hand, not forcefully, but as if making a vow. "I promise." They stood there, hand in hand, as the sun disappeared behind the skyline. The noise of the city faded into the hum of evening, replaced by something peaceful and certain. In that moment, they were not a millionaire and a waitress, not a benefactor and a co-director, just two people who had chosen the same road, the road of kindness, integrity, and quiet courage. And though neither said the words, both understood that love, like every act of good they had ever done, did not need to be declared. It only needed to be lived. The days after the anniversary celebration passed quietly, filled with a sense of calm accomplishment. The Open Hands Foundation continued to flourish, and the air in the office carried a warmth that came from knowing their work was changing real lives. For Emily Parker, every morning felt purposeful again. Yet beneath the peace, a faint unease began to stir an instinct she could not ignore. David Carter had been busier than usual. Though he never mentioned details, Emily noticed how often he took calls late at night, or how his expression would shift when he read certain emails. One evening, she found him alone in the office, the lights low, papers spread across the desk. "You have been quiet lately," she said softly, leaning against the doorframe. He looked up, startled but smiling. "Just sorting through some issues with the property contracts, nothing serious." Emily stepped closer. "You are lying," she said, her tone gentle but certain. He hesitated, then sighed. "You always see through me." "That is because you have stopped looking me in the eye when you say you are fine," she replied. David rubbed the back of his neck, looking out the window toward the dark skyline. "I received a letter from the board of Carter Enterprises. They are suing for ownership of the foundation's brand name, claiming it was established under their intellectual property when I was CEO. Emily's chest tightened. "They cannot do that." "They can try," he said quietly. "And they will. It is not about the foundation anymore. It is about destroying me for walking away." Silence filled the room. The hum of city traffic echoed faintly outside. "What happens if they win?" she asked. He met her gaze. "We could lose everything. The programs, the funding, even the name." Emily's voice steadied. "Then we fight." David smiled faintly. "I knew you would say that." The next weeks became a blur of meetings with lawyers, statements to the press, and endless paperwork. The story leaked quickly. Carter Enterprises sues former CEO over philanthropic project. Media outlets twisted the narrative into something sensational, claiming betrayal and corporate theft. But through it all, Emily and David stood together, refusing to let fear dictate their choices. When donors began to worry, Emily faced the cameras herself. "The Open Hands Foundation was built on honesty and heart," she said firmly. "We do not own kindness, and no one else does either. No lawsuit can take that away." Her words went viral within hours. Thousands of people donated small amounts online, sending messages of support. Some wrote, "For the bus fare that started it all." Others simply said, "Keep fighting." One night, after another long day in court, David stopped by the foundation. The building was dark except for the light from Emily's office. She was sitting at her desk, half asleep over a stack of documents. "You should go home," he said softly. She looked up, her eyes heavy but determined. "So should you." He walked closer and sat across from her. For a long moment, they just sat in silence, listening to the rain outside. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked suddenly. "Walking away from that world, from everything you built before this?" He shook his head. "No. I only regret not finding this sooner." Emily's voice softened. "You mean the foundation?" "I mean you," he said quietly. She looked down, her heart pounding. The weight of his words hung in the air between them, real, unguarded, impossible to ignore. "David," she whispered, "you do not have to say that just because everything feels uncertain." "No, I am saying it because it is true," he replied. "When the noise fades, when the headlines disappear, you are the only thing that still makes sense." The words left her breathless. For a long while, neither spoke. The rain tapped softly against the windows, steady and rhythmic. Finally, she stood, crossing to the window. "If we lose the name, we will start over," she said firmly. "We can build again. Maybe it will not be called Open Hands. Maybe it will be something new. But it will still be us." David rose from his seat, standing beside her. "You really believe that?" "I do," she said, "because people cannot trademark goodness." He smiled, and for the first time in weeks, the tension in his face eased. "You always know how to see light in the dark." She turned to him. "You taught me that sometimes light starts with a single spark. That night on the bus stop, it was just one small kindness. And look how far it traveled." David's eyes softened. "Then we will keep it traveling." They stood together, watching the city lights shimmer through the rain. The lawsuit still loomed ahead, the outcome uncertain. But in that quiet moment, none of it mattered. They had already survived storms harsher than this one. And as thunder rolled softly in the distance, Emily realized something she had not before. The true foundation was not made of walls or names. It was built from trust, courage, and the kind of love that never needed to be spoken to be understood. Whatever happened next, they would face it the same way they had faced everything else, from the heart, hand in hand, refusing to let the world tell them what kindness was worth. The morning of the final court hearing arrived with gray skies and restless wind. The city felt unusually still, as if holding its breath. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled every bench, their cameras poised for headlines. At the front sat David Carter, his expression calm but determined. Beside him was Emily Parker, her hands folded tightly in her lap, steady despite the storm around them. The case had dragged on for months. Carter Enterprises wanted ownership of the Open Hands Foundation's name and assets, claiming it was established under corporate jurisdiction. But everyone in that room knew the truth. It was not about property, it was about pride. The company's board wanted to erase David's redemption story, to reclaim control of the one thing he had built with heart instead of profit. As the judge entered, the room rose. Emily's heart pounded. She had never liked courtrooms, the polished wood, the echoing footsteps, the cold formality of it all. But today, she felt no fear. She had come too far to back down now. The opposing lawyer spoke first, his tone sharp and rehearsed. "Your Honor, Carter Enterprises has clear evidence that the Open Hands Foundation was initially conceived and funded during Mr. Carter's tenure as CEO. Therefore, the intellectual property, including its brand identity, belongs to the company." Dud. When he finished, David's lawyer stood. "Your Honor," he began, "while it is true that the foundation began under Mr. Carter's leadership, its transformation, the heart and purpose that define it today, were born outside the company's walls. This is not a battle over branding. It is a battle over integrity. The foundation exists because of one woman's act of kindness, not because of a corporation's investment." The judge turned to David. "Mr. Carter, would you like to speak for yourself?" David rose slowly, buttoning his jacket. The courtroom went silent. "Your Honor," he said clearly, "when I created the Open Hands Foundation, I thought I was starting another corporate charity, but I was wrong. It became something much greater. It became a reminder that humanity is not owned. Compassion cannot be trademarked, and the name may be mine on paper, but the spirit, the reason it exists, belongs to every person it has helped." He paused, his gaze finding Emily across the room. "If you must assign ownership, then give it to her, because without her, this foundation would be nothing but an empty promise." A murmur spread through the room. Even the judge seemed moved by his words. She tapped her pen lightly on the bench before speaking. I have heard enough. The courtroom held its breath. In the matter of Carter Enterprises versus the Open Hands Foundation, the judge said firmly, the court rules in favor of the defendants. The foundation will remain an independent entity. Ownership and rights to the name and assets are legally transferred to the current directors, Mr. David Carter and Miss Emily Parker. The sound that followed was not loud, just a collective exhale of relief, but for those who had fought this battle, it felt like thunder. Reporters rushed to the hallway, their questions blending into noise, but David and Emily barely heard them. Outside the courthouse, rain began to fall lightly. Cameras flashed as David turned to the crowd. We did not win for ourselves, he said. We won for everyone who believes that kindness still has a place in this world. Emily stood beside him, her voice calm but strong. And we will keep proving that every act of good, no matter how small, has the power to outlast greed. No, the crowd applauded, but what mattered most was the quiet moment that followed. David turned to her, rain glistening on his hair. You did it, he said softly. She shook her head. We did it, together. He smiled. I think we just made the impossible happen. Emily looked toward the city skyline, where rain shimmered against glass towers. Maybe kindness was never impossible, she said. Maybe people just forgot how strong it is. Lou? Later that evening, back at the foundation, the team gathered to celebrate. Ruth brought coffee and pie, the volunteers brought laughter, and the building that had once been filled with uncertainty now felt like home again. David raised a cup. To every person who stood with us, he said. To the ones who gave, the ones who hoped, and the ones who refused to give up. To kindness, Emily added, smiling. The only thing that grows when you give it away. As the laughter faded into soft conversation, David and Emily slipped outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and glimmering under the streetlights. They stood at the steps of the foundation, side by side. You know, David said, his voice low, I thought losing everything years ago was the end of my story. Turns out, it was just the beginning. Emily smiled gently. Life has a way of rewriting us when we least expect it. He looked at her, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. Thank you for believing in me, even when I gave you every reason not to. She met his eyes. You earned that belief. A bus rumbled past on the street below, the same kind that had carried their first meeting years ago. They watched it go, both thinking of that rainy night, that $10 moment that had changed everything. And as the city lights reflected off the puddles at their feet, David reached out and took her hand firm, steady, certain. For the first time, neither of them looked back. The war was over. The storm had passed. And all that remained was the simple, undeniable truth that had started it all. Every kindness counts, and love, real love, always finds its way home. Morning sunlight spilled through the tall glass windows of the Open Hands Foundation, painting the floors in soft gold. The building was quiet, except for the distant sound of volunteers unpacking boxes in the main hall. For the first time in months, there was no tension, no crisis, no press waiting outside. Just peace. Emily Parker stood by the window of her office, coffee cup in hand, watching the city come alive below. The streets were wet from last night's rain, shining like mirrors. Every bus that passed reminded her of where this story began. One rainy night, one act of compassion, one stranger who turned out to be a man running from his own world. Behind her, the door opened softly. You are up early again, David Carter said, stepping into the room with his usual gentle smile. She turned. You say that as if you were not here before me. He laughed quietly. Old habits. I like watching the city wake up. Still trying to fix everything before breakfast? She teased. Not anymore, he said. Now I just try to be grateful for what is already fixed. They stood together for a moment, watching the light shift across the skyline. The foundation had survived every storm, lawsuits, scandals, doubt, and now stood stronger than ever. Its name had become a symbol of hope, not because of its founders, but because of what it represented. Kindness that multiplied. Later that morning, Ruth gathered everyone in the main hall. All right, people, she said, clapping her hands. Big day ahead. The new youth center officially opens at noon, and the mayor himself is coming. Let us make sure the coffee is strong and the smiles are real. The volunteers laughed and scattered to their stations. Emily and David exchanged a look, half amusement, half awe. Neither had imagined their little foundation would one day open an entire community center. At noon, the event began. Families, students, city officials, and former beneficiaries filled the courtyard. The air buzzed with joy. Cameras rolled as Ruth introduced Emily to the stage. Emily stepped up, microphone in hand, her voice steady. "When we started this foundation, we did not have much," she began. "Just a small team, a borrowed space, and a belief that one act of kindness can start a chain reaction. Today, this new youth center is proof of that belief. It belongs to everyone who ever lent a hand, shared a meal, or simply refused to give up on goodness." She looked at David, standing among the crowd. "Some people say kindness is weakness," she continued, "but I have seen it rebuild lives, including my own. I have seen it turn guilt into purpose and strangers into family. So, to every person here, never stop giving, never stop believing. Every kindness counts." Applause erupted. Even the mayor looked, moved as he cut the ribbon, declaring the center officially open. Children ran through the halls, exploring rooms filled with books, art supplies, and computers. Volunteers guided parents through new job training programs. The space buzzed with the sound of hope made real. Later, as the crowd began to thin, David found Emily standing alone near the entrance, watching a group of teenagers paint a mural on the wall. It showed two open hands releasing a dove into the sky. "It is beautiful," he said quietly. She nodded. "It feels like closure." "Or a beginning," he said. She smiled at him. "You always find a better word." He took a deep breath. "There is something I have been meaning to tell you." Emily turned toward him, her expression soft. "What is it?" He hesitated, searching for words. "I have been offered a position on the city's economic council. They want me to oversee community development, help other organizations like ours grow." "Oh." Her heart tightened. "That is incredible." "It is," he said, his voice gentle. "But it means stepping back from the day-to-day here. You would be in charge of the foundation." She looked at him quietly. "You are really ready to let go?" He nodded. "I think I was always meant to. This was never about me, Emily. It was about what we could build together, and what you would carry forward." Tears stung her eyes, but she smiled. "You trust me with it?" "With my whole life," he said simply. They stood in silence for a moment, surrounded by the laughter of children and the sound of music playing softly from the speakers. Finally, Emily said, "Then go do what you are meant to do. Help more people. That is what this was always for." David looked at her, his voice quiet but full. "And what about us?" She smiled faintly. "We have never needed titles to stay connected." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to her. Inside was the original $10 bill, now faded, creased, and fragile. On it, he had written one sentence in neat handwriting: "For the next person who needs a way home." Emily looked up, eyes glistening. "You kept it all this time?" "Of course," he said. "It reminded me of where everything started." She held the bill carefully, like something sacred. "Then I will keep it safe until it finds the right person." "Oh." As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light over the courtyard, David turned toward the bustling youth center and said quietly, "You know, if someone had told me years ago that a $10 act of kindness could rewrite my entire life, I would have laughed." Emily smiled. "And now?" He looked at her, his expression peaceful. "Now I believe that the smallest kindness can change everything." They stood there, watching the next generation walk through the doors of the foundation, laughter echoing through the air. The world was far from perfect, but it was better because two people had chosen compassion over power, truth over image, and love over fear. And as the day faded into evening, Emily whispered to herself, "Every kindness counts." This time, it was not just a saying, it was a legacy.